Very much, Caritha. Our next presenter is Aldon Lynn Nielsen, George and Barbara Kelly Professor of American Literature at Penn State University. Aldon is a critic and poet. His scholarly books include Reading Race, White American Poets and the Racial Discourse in the 20th Century, which received the Samla Studies Prize and Black Chant, Languages of African American Postmodernism. He has received a Darwin Turner Award, the Larry Neal Award for Poetry, 2 Gertrude Stein Awards for Innovation, and the Josephine Miles Award for his poetry in integral music, Languages of African American Innovation, and the American Book Award for Don't Deny My Name, Words and Music in the Black Intellectual Tradition. Fun fact, Aldon is a guitar player who has been in bands since he was in high school, playing rock and roll, R&B, pop, jazz, blues, and some doo-wop, and anything Bob Dylan. And for the past 4 summers, he's played guitar when he teaches in Wuhan, China. He also plays harmonica. Please join me for Aldon Nielsen. Thank you.
I should probably be more specific. I'm a stand-up tragedian. In the words of the late Amiri Baraka, I substitute for the dead lecturer, which is all a way of saying I'm a poet critic, living precariously on that slash mark that our institutions insist on trying to drive into our writing lives. This also means that I'm something of a conundrum to administrations. I'm a poet who doesn't teach creative writing. I'm a critic who writes in lyric mode as often as he writes in peer-reviewed published essays. I should mention these faces you see up here, you can blame them as the responsible parties. These are the teachers and friends who told me that such a thing was possible to do. I hope you recognize most of their faces. As a scholar, critic, and teacher, there are several things I'm concerned with very broadly. Histories of English language poetry, in particular African American poetry post-World War II on to today. I have also worked considerably, as you might have gathered from some of the titles that were read in the introduction, on questions of racial formation, racial discourse, how we talk about race, how race exists in language. If race is a social construction, we need to know how it keeps getting constructed so we can construct it some other kinds of ways. That's one of the things I work in. Some people might think poetry is an odd place to do that, but that to me is a sort of a central location for this sort of thing. I'm also concerned with trying to bring renewed attention to African American writers who have made significant contributions to the very trends, theories, poetics that we've been talking about for the last 40 years, but who are infrequently acknowledged. Fun fact, Penn State hired Michael and me the same year, precisely so that we'd be the only university on the face of the earth with 2 specialists in a particular poet who is named Melvin B. Tolson. Some still lesser known figures like Russell Atkins, who was writing essays about deconstruction back in 1948, Eloise Lofton, Jane Cortez, and so forth. So with my students, with my critical writing, that's the sort of thing I do all the time. Almost all my work is concerned with race in one way or another, no matter what the overall topic is. But quite simply, as a poet, I never wanted to be the man that broke your heart. I only wanted to be the man who wrote the song that broke your heart.
Thank you very much.
I'm reclaiming my time. No.
So yeah, the tune that you opened up with, what significance does that have for you?
Well, since it didn't exist until that moment, it has the significance of spontaneous invention. Here's the connection between musicians and poets. Well, one of many connections. I've talked about this at previous MLAs on jazz poetry and so forth. What poets like me are interested in is the spontaneous creation of new forms. Mm-hmm. You know, we are tremendously interested, like the Oulipo group, in older forms, but we're also interested in constantly creating new forms. And any good musician is doing exactly that. So. I'd rather write poems than write song lyrics. Mm-hmm.
So one of the other things that you're famous for, especially here at the MLA, are the off-site poetry readings, which
there isn't one of this year, I'm afraid.
Which there isn't one this year. But tell me more about that. Like, how did that start? And
this started for the two people in the room who don't know this. I grew up in Washington D.C. Mm-hmm. And one of the first MLAs I was at was in Washington D.C. So I called up Rod Smith, who some of you may know is the publisher of Ariel and Edge editions. And we noticed that Charles Bernstein and Bob Perlman were going to be at the MLA. So at a place in Adams Morgan, it's not there anymore, we had the first of these offsite readings. It's also unusual in that Marjorie Perloff read a paper at that offsite. We've never repeated that. But they kept growing. There wasn't one every year, but for 20 years there was an offsite MLA reading almost every year. And God bless the MLA and Rosemary and the program committee. When it came time for the 20th anniversary, they actually made room for an on-site, off-site reading that was open to the public like this event. And so we celebrated the 20 years. Charles Bernstein and Rod Smith, who had hosted that first one, were there. And then the next night we all trooped over to another location where 50 poets read. Mm-hmm. We've had some gargantuan ones here in Chicago at past MLAs. I think it just got to be too big for people to feel like they wanted to take on. But one of the reasons he knows about this is, in addition, normally I'm taking pictures. My friend here and I were comparing cameras in the elevator, but I don't get to take any pictures because they made me sit up here. But the other thing I did was record most of those off-site readings, and at least 8 or 9 of them are on Pin Sound on the web. So even today you can go and hear some of those marathons, and I think you'll be really happy you did. Every kind of poetry you can imagine is there.
Thank you much, Alden. Thank you. Our next